The agenda for this next 45 minutes is going to be engineering for the new stack. We're going to walk through the new stack and what it looks like and how we get content out there. And then we're going to talk about the engineering process. Some of that's going to get fairly technical, but not, we're going to keep it at enough of a high level that you can hopefully bring some concepts back inside of your organizations and create some conversations about reusing content across interactive channels or interactive modes of content. So we're also going to look at what the chatbot landscape looks like in particular. There's going to be a focus today on the chatbot side of AI, chatbots, and marketing automation. But the principles are the same in each of the channels. We actually built a chatbot that teaches the basics of intelligent content. And we're pulling all of that content directly from a single source CMS. And so what we're going to be walking through today is an example of the implementation of a content type that has been extended to include chatbot elements in it, that we are able to derive content to answer questions via Slack or Facebook Messenger or other chatbot interfaces, SMS, or eventually higher and higher fidelity user interfaces. So let's talk a little bit about the really old content stack. We used to write content and publish it in print, and that print would go out and, as a friend of mine says, wrap fish, or it would be used as kindling in a fire, or it would be used as a recycled piece of content, or a recycled physical newspaper. So, in other words, we literally threw away the content in its published form after we were done with it. But then the web came along, and the web was pretty easy, right? We were able to publish content, but now, when we published it to a web server, the content had a life cycle that lived much, much longer and could be searched and found at very low incremental cost by multiple users. So we could have content live in perpetuity, accessible to all, right? So that's great. But then our landscape very quickly evolved, and we ended up with multiple channels of devices and multiple channels of distribution. So that transformation has ended up leaving us with different modes of publishing. And what we're going to look at here is a content stack that takes a look at those modes in context. So first of all, we have to get content to our web presentation layer. How do we do that, right? So we have a CMS, a component-based content management system that is containing some level of structured and sometimes unstructured content that we push to a web presentation. This is the architecture that existed for a long number of years in the formation of the web that we know today. We started to develop structured content authoring and added an application layer as we needed to do more things on the web presentation. But then along came social channels like Facebook and external AIs like Siri and Alexa and search engines like Google that started to create more and more semantic intelligence. And so we needed to start publishing out more specific rendered content to those channels. So standards started to be developed like schema.org. Who uses schema.org on their current web properties? Okay, just a few. For whom is schema.org a brand new idea? Never heard of it before. Okay, so we'll look at that more a little later. It's an important concept because it's a way to wrap content in microdata that the robots can understand. And if we're not wrapping our content in that microdata, the competitor that is is more likely to be found. Because what the microdata allows the search engine to do is understand the objects that your content is referencing at a semantic level. So what that means is that it can look at a doctor's name and understand who that doctor is, where they practice, and what their specialty is, as opposed to understanding that that's just text on a page and it looks like a person's name. So we can give very specific semantic information through schema.org microdata, and now that's an important part of what we do as engineers. Open Graph is another another microdata format that allows us to take our content and output it to Facebook and other social media destinations where they can consume our content and repurpose it inside of their platforms. AMP Pages came along. Now, AMP Pages is essentially a fast-loading format that Google came up with where they said, we are willing, if you give us AMP tags on your website, we're willing to cache your article and republish it to our visitors across our global content distribution network. And that is pretty darn powerful, but you have to engineer the content at a structure that will enable an interpreter to produce AMP versions of the content. And so that ends up going to Google. But of course, we also started needing to be able to get content to other channels internally. So we've got knowledge management systems and intranets. But then externally, we've got mobile applications that might be on iOS and Android. And then we also need to syndicate the content beyond to third-party publishers. So how do we do that? Well, we started to develop a content API. And the content API is essentially a content as a service provider. And what that allows us to do is take content from our CMS database, interpreted and pre-processed by our application layer, and then output in different formats via the content API. It's really important for modern publishing organizations to involve this kind of content provider as a part of the architecture. If it doesn't exist, we end up having to write and read everything either out of the CMS directly, or we end up doing the horrible, horrible thing of copying and pasting, right? Which is all too often what happens. So we need to be able to get content out to lots of different content consumers, and that content API helps to do that. Was anybody here at the AR and VR conversation where we started looking at, so cool, so we had a few folks there. So there's some really good conversations about what's happening in virtual reality and augmented reality. In the future, more and more content that we have in our CMSs will be relevant to an augmented reality application. So for example, if we've got medical training application where we're pulling in disease type data, we might be able to take that from our CCMS and output it on top of a virtual cadaver, right, that somebody's interacting with and can get in-context information about disease types. So instead of having that have to exist in a programmer's hard-coded world, we can instead provide that from our content API. So this is how we also get content to our chatbot platform. And what we want to look at is a model for taking the content from our API and publishing it out to chatbots, which then to a chatbot platform, which then republishes out to multiple, for example, Facebook Messenger, Slack, or other UIs that are interacting with that chatbot platform. All of the actual intelligence, artificial intelligence, is things like natural language understanding or natural language processing or natural language generation, like automated insights. And we were looking at with the Washington Post generating language. All of that stuff interacts with this chatbot platform level. So it's sort of it's intelligence being applied to the chatbot platform, which is really another repository for the content that we're pulling from our API. So we also pulled our content into this other mode of content, automated marketing system. So this is where we take our content and combine it with customer experience data. So we need to know what our visitors are doing on our websites and our different digital properties. And we want to collect that data in a CX, or customer experience database. And a lot of the CX platforms out there, like Sitecore, like Kentico, and Adobe, all have a CX database built in. Some organizations build that as a data warehouse, a data cube that can be accessed at any time for use in real-time content personalization. So I want to know, what is my visitor experiencing on my website right now, and how is that related to other taxonomy nodes? So if on the cancer type example, if somebody's coming in and spending time in prostate cancer content, and they're in a particular geolocation, I might provide clinical trials that are happening in that geolocation for prostate cancer. Or if I'm connecting a member with a different set of affiliate data that I have about them, plus the session data that I'm looking at within that session, I can combine what we know about a member inside of a nonprofit organization and what we're seeing in that session to provide them with a better experience. All of that stuff happens because we're putting content next to customer experience data. And we're connecting the two, usually with the help of an automated marketing system. And that is then using the content, the structured content, as sort of like a DJ would, and mixing and matching pieces out to email campaigns, personalization, and other more fluid experiences. So this is the new content stack that we're dealing with. We've got 3 modes of content: published, interactive, and automated. And we need to get content to operate in all of those modes of communication with our customers. So content is evolving very, very fast. And everybody here understands that, because we've been through a few days of looking at content which is moving from 2D to 3D, both literally and metaphorically, from static to dynamic, and from resting to interactive, and from a single version to many targeted variants. So it's really going from dead to alive, and from cement to electricity, and from one channel to many, many channels. That evolution is happening, and it's our architectures and our systems and our engineerings that enables this evolution to happen. Because at the end of the day, it's only content in motion that matters. Content in motion is content that matters. All content ROI emerges from motion. Content that is flowing between producers and humans and robots. And if the content is at rest, and no human or robot is interacting with that content, it is not fundamentally valuable. There is no inherent value to content at rest. So if you spent $50,000 developing a content asset, that content asset is not worth $50,000. It's worth nothing until a robot or a human interacts with it. And so that's what we need to produce, is interactions with our content.